Welcome to another episode of Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindy Baldy, and this is my husband and co-host, Jeffrey Tumlin.
Yellow! Welcome to the podcast where we try to inspire better work performance. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk about habits and some of the different theories around building habits and maybe getting rid of some bad ones.
There you go.
And so,
what do you want to start with? You want to start with my example?
Sure.
All right. So we'll start with my example of, used to be not too long ago, a couple years ago, I use my phone for my alarm. And so got into the habit of when I would turn the alarm off in the morning, I would just hit my email. And one of my favorite books, I forget the woman who wrote it, Robin something, is called Never Check Email in the Morning. It's a productivity book. And I completely know that checking the email is just a terrible way to start your day. And, not the way that I want it to start the day. But I found myself in the morning turning the alarm off and then immediately hitting the Gmail and seeing what was there. And before I knew it, seemed like it took almost no time. Yeah. To where, boom, that was a habit. And so with that habit in mind, I thought we'd maybe start by talking about a lot of the ideas about habits. Talk about a habit loop, where it has three parts, where you have the trigger,
the behavior,
and then the reward. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Mm-hmm. Like if we were doing an acronym, that's TBR. Tibber. Mm-hmm. Not a great acronym, but
no,
we could probably do a little work and make it taco if we needed to.
He makes everything taco.
TAR.
TAR.
Trigger, action, reward. TAR.
There you go, TAR. That's a much better one.
That is a better one.
Yeah.
TAR.
I knew I could count on you to come up with an acronym.
Yeah. Trigger, action, reward. And so in that case, the trigger is it's the morning. I wake up. My phone is in my hand.
There's probably like a little bit of anxiousness, like what happened while I was asleep.
Yeah, and also, can I get a jump on the day? Our right-hand woman, Rebecca, has she sent me anything since when I last looked that I need to do that if I don't do, will she miss a whole day, right?
Right.
Will she be behind a day because I didn't look at something and get it to her? Because in my world, if I don't check email in the morning, then it goes all day. Yeah, because I'm out doing a project, whatever, and so I'm not messing with it. I'm not going to mess with it during the day. And so those were some of those feelings. And so you think...
I think that's like an important... I think it's a really good example because I think people do a lot of habits that they're not really even aware that they're habits.
Yeah.
I think checking email a lot of the time feels like, oh, well, that's just part of my job.
Right.
But actually, if you're doing it and getting lost in it, or it's how you start things off. If you're doing it because you're using it as a distraction or to sort of take you out of a particular negative feeling, then you have, and you're doing it constantly for that, then you have a habit.
Yeah. If you're what's there? Am I missing something? And then the intermittent reward of, is something good in there? Yeah. And so all of that.
Well, that's part of the reward part is the random reward aspect of email and social media. It's like going to a casino.
Yeah.
And
which makes it
slot
powerful.
Machine, right.
Yeah.
Which that's what makes it the reward part so powerful and valuable is
in this particular example. Yeah.
Well, in any social media.
Yeah. Because you don't know what you're going to get.
You're not going to get.
You get crap, and then you get something great, and then you get something mediocre. But it's like I hit the triple cherries every now and then.
Yeah.
Which keeps me
coming back.
Yeah. And go ahead.
And so just to talk a little bit more about that. So I think the email is a very good example of a habit that people might have and not even really consider it a habit. They might be writing it off as work.
Yeah, this is just what I have to do.
But I also think, some of the binging on TV, now that we don't have to wait for the TV schedule, I think some of the things that we do with watching shows is also like part of a habit loop where, you know, you feel something, you start watching that habit. Yeah.
Walk through the cycle for a binge. A good show, trigger, by the way, if you want to binge, we recommend The Shield. Still our favorite show.
Yeah, that's still our favorite, but there are a bunch of them.
That's probably the only one we ever did, actually.
That one was crazy. We would actually, at the time...
Back in the Blockbuster day, we're dating ourselves.
That's right. And so we would go, we'd rent,
they would give them like 6 episodes at a time or something?
Yeah, it was like a CD, and like you had like six episodes.
Something like that.
And if you returned the CD before midnight, you could grab another one for free.
Yeah.
And so there were some nights where we did that. That's a ton of TV for us.
Yeah. Now, I don't remember ever binge watching anything else in our life.
No.
Do you?
No.
No. Because, you know, back in the day, you couldn't.
Well, yeah.
You know, when it's the TV, you had to wait a week. Right?
Well, yeah. So this is all like...
I know we're really dating ourselves. If you're below the age of 40 and listening to this, please forgive us for these last couple minutes.
I just wanted to mention that maybe it's some things in your life that you formed habits around that are so socially acceptable, like watching TV shows or checking your email, like it's acceptable. It's like work behavior that's acceptable, that you may have missed that you actually have a habit loop.
Yeah.
And that you're doing something to distract yourself and get away from a negative feeling.
Yeah, which gets us to... And so we wanted to start with kind of habit 1.0 is this idea of the TAR loop. Trigger, action, reward. Go back to, let's walk through the 2 that we've talked about so far. Trigger, it's the morning, and my phone is right there, and I'm thinking, if I don't check this, I may not get a jump on the day. I may put Rebecca behind.
You may fail at getting something done.
I may not get something done that somebody's waiting on me to get done.
Yeah.
And so the action is I hit the Gmail icon or you know, open up the app, check my email. And then the reward is occasionally there was something I needed to do. And so you get this feeling of, oh, good thing I did that. Good thing I checked. Occasionally something good came in overnight. Mm-hmm. A possible speaking opportunity in San Diego. Oh, wow, check this out, you know? And so you start your day off with all of a sudden, I'm going to San Diego and somebody's paying for it, right?
Yay!
Yep, triple cherries on the old slot machine. And so that's what makes the habit sticky. It's flowing through that. It's flowing through that loop, and it gets the reinforcement. There is some kind of reward, even if it doesn't happen all the time. In some ways, as we were talking about, especially if it doesn't happen all the time. And so I'm left kind of craving the times that it does. And that puts me back into the next morning. I want the reward again. I have the same feelings or similar feelings. And pretty soon, after a while, I'm not even having the feelings. I'm just...
Well, so the way that the brain works is that you do an activity and it like assigns it like a reward, right?
Yeah.
And it's the part of the brain where like your senses, your emotion, your senses, and like your previous information kind of come together, and the brain stamps it with like this average composite score of reward value.
Right. And, +5.
Right. And so
whatever.
This thing, whether it's eating cake, smoking a cigarette, checking your email, this thing has this reward value, and then the brain stops thinking about it. Like that's the reward value that you think you're getting every single time you engage in it.
Yeah. And then
but
it's
you
automatic.
Actually stop processing what that reward is.
Yeah. Yeah. And so now we're on to 2.0. So 1.0 is this idea of the habit loop. Trigger, action, reward. We start doing stuff because it gives a reward. There's a trigger that signals when we do it, whether it's in the morning, whether it's we have a cigarette after we eat dinner, whether it's we binge watch Netflix before we get something to eat, right after we get home from work, whatever the behavior is, there's a trigger that's starting it. There's the behavior itself, the action, and then there's the reward that it gave us. So that's kind of 1.0. Mm-hmm. And now we're into 2.0. And so 2.0 has a number of proponents, but I think the one that we're enjoying the most. 1.0, kind of the best write-up of it was by a journalist from the New York Times named Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habits. Who are some of the people you're thinking about in the 1.0 realm?
Oh, I was also thinking about Judson Brewer. He does a really good job of writing it up and describing like where in the brain this is happening, and I think essentially he explains why, because of the location where the trigger is happening, which is the old brain, that's why we can't think ourselves out of habits.
Right. And so this is the key point of 2.0, and partly why we're having this conversation today on the podcast about habits, is that there's a lot of this emerging research by Judson, Brewer, and other colleagues, and we'll put links to all the references in the show notes, that says basically habits are almost exclusively about feelings. And so when we try to think ourselves out of a habit, like a New Year's resolution, that almost never works, because you have to actually feel yourself out of a habit. But the good news is a lot of our feelings aren't accurate anymore about the habits.
Right, because of that stamping, that reward value stamping that the brain does when you first engage in a behavior.
Yeah. To give another example of this is the kind of 2.0 thinking, which is very heavily influenced by how we're feeling about the reward, and that the reward's feelings can change over time. And so when we first started doing the consulting work, a lot of our lunches are catered. And, at the time, we had just gone from being basically out of graduate school for a very long time. And so we didn't have a ton of money. And
we were used to free pizza.
And we were used to free pizza as graduate students. And now we're getting free catered lunches. And so, I would think, like, what an amazing deal.
In Texas, which means barbecue.
And Mexican food. Texas two food groups, Mexican food and barbecue.
Which are both delicious.
Yeah, and so in the beginning, the value stamp of that was, this is amazing. We're actually getting paid on the job, and we're getting a free lunch, and it's wonderful. It's Mexican food today. It's barbecue tomorrow. How wonderful. And so it gets a positive stamp. So you fast forward a few years doing this work, and, not only are, it's not the most conducive to being thin, that particular food group.
Probably also not most conducive for low cholesterol either.
Yeah. And I feel bad. When I eat like that at lunch, when I eat enchiladas or fajitas with all the fixings, or a barbecue, all the foods that I love, after a number of years of catered lunches, I still had it in my head that this is great. This is a good reward. But it actually was making me feel bad, slow on my feet, not as effective as I wanted to be as a teacher, and was taking me the way that we were eating at lunch. It was taking me about an hour and a half to 2 hours after to recover from that. Which
is really problematic in what we're doing, right, because we're supplying the energy for the room.
Right. And so it was over time something actually that had become negative, in a similar way to when you first start smoking. If you're a smoker, there may be a positive feeling.
And so the reward gets stamped
as positive.
This is good.
Yeah.
And now go ahead.
Fast forward
a couple of decades. Well, it's no longer
you're not fitting in.
People growl at you.
Now you're 40.
Right.
Everybody, they roll their eyes when you light up and all this. So you're not getting that reward.
Right.
And I think the receptors.
Well, it gets. I think.
I forget how.
What happens with the habit is your receptors start closing down, so you actually need more.
Right.
To basically light them up.
And so it's not actually doing as much for you, and maybe now you're starting to realize it's harder to breathe. You can't. It's harder to walk and whatever. Not walk, but harder to...
Some people don't want to be around you because you smell like a cigarette.
All this stuff. And the 2.0 research basically says you have to update the actual reward is.
Yeah. Before you can break the habit, the main thing that you have to do is update the reward value that is in your brain. Because if you don't do that, it's much harder to find something that will give you a greater value that will help you break the reward. So step 1 is figure out your TAR. Step 2 is start paying attention to what's happening in your body as you're engaging in the action. So that way, like, how is it actually making you feel? So that way your brain can start rewriting the reward value. You're forcing your brain to start rewriting the reward value.
Yeah.
And then step 3 is finding the bigger, better offer.
Yeah. Yeah. Over the past few years, one of the reasons we want to talk about this, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm using Judson Brewer's terminology there.
For the 2.0. Yeah, there's other people who are in this kind of 2.0 landscape, but it's basically taking the 1.0 trigger action reward and saying that our feelings about the reward have a lot more to do with it than we think, and those feelings are often outdated, but in a way that can help us actually make new and better habits. Mm-hmm. And he uses the term a bigger, better offer, to trade out the smoking for something else, to trade out, to do something else. Not necessarily trade isn't quite the right word for reasons we'll talk about in a minute, but to, instead of checking the email, to take deep breaths. That's what I did.
Right.
Yeah, maybe we should talk about that now.
Right. And so what they mean by finding something that... So the goal is that you want to find a change in behavior that breaks the habit loop, that is internally driven. And so...
What do you mean by that?
So that you have control over starting it.
Oh, okay.
And so that way, like, at any time you feel, you recognize the trigger, you can do something else. Immediately pull it out of your pocket.
Okay.
And so, go ahead. You gave a good example.
I just used the example of, so the way that I ended up changing the check the email in the morning habit was, it was through the combination of the 1.0 trigger action reward and the 2.0 recognizing the feelings. I started recognizing I don't want to be doing this. I clear out my email before I go to bed to make sure that anything that I needed to respond to, I'm doing that. And so there's absolutely no need for me to do this. And when I do it, it's taking out time in the morning that I don't have because I always exercise in the morning, and I try to, to get to the places I'm supposed to be on time. And I wanted to instead feel like I had my head together a little more, which is the opposite of what the email was doing for me. It was getting me off on these small tasks and moving small things around. And so instead, as soon as I wake up, I take 21 deep breaths. 21 is just a good number. It's divisible. I break it into chunks of 7. And so that's easy for me to count to.
Yeah, you just randomly chose that, right?
Yeah, just random. I mean, it could be any number. That seemed about right. That takes about a minute and some change. And that was about enough.
And, part of doing that is, again, like, turning inward. Like, you have the control to breathe anywhere. Like, if you get triggered in a meeting, like, nobody's gonna have a problem with you breathing, because we breathe everywhere we go. So it's one of those replacement, and it's not really replacement. It's one of those alternate
pathways,
actions that you can do that will break the habit. And critically, like, you have to actually be paying attention to how that makes you feel. How does it? Is it going all the way down into your gut, or is it getting blocked there? Do you feel like sometimes, like, if you do breathing that even silently, like, you're kind of almost like chanting in your head? It's weird, but like, it can have like a vibration kind of in your mouth and your nose. And that can have like a fairly pleasant feeling. And so, you know, you are
getting kind of new agey there.
Yeah, I know. But it's true. I mean, like sounds have an impact on your body, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
So,
it's true. The science is pretty clear about that.
Yeah, and breathing is the most subtle sound, but we often don't pay any attention to it. And you can add a little bit of sound to it, and probably nobody's really going to notice unless like you're super close to them. And so,
you also get the ancient signal it's sending of there's no threat around.
Right.
It's not only the sound; it's also the
Right.
The signal.
Yeah, if I'm able to breathe deep and sort of put my body into relaxation, then I'm not actually in threat.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's not just doing the breathing, it's paying attention to how the breathing is making you feel. Hello, musers. Now it's time for commercial break.
We talk about keynotes. And so we do a lot of work. Actually, Cindi next week is doing a keynote. 2. Actually, somehow she got herself 2 keynotes. How'd you do that?
I don't know.
That was crazy. Yeah, actually 2 keynotes. Anyway, we do a ton of keynote presentations. Love doing it. I'm going out to South Carolina the next week to do one. Looking forward to it. That'll be a lot of fun. We love them. They're fun. You got a lot of people. It's the highlight of your convention or conference or retreat or whatever. Topics, anything related to management. Which one are you doing next week? Cindy's doing stress and anxiety, 2.
And resiliency.
And resiliency.
Yeah.
Stress, anxiety is 1. Resiliency is the second one. I'm doing effective communication in the digital age when I go to Columbia. But we do everything. She's done a lot of negotiation and bargaining.
Yes, with a lot of negotiation, yeah.
Yep. I've done a lot of conflict resolution. I've done, what else did I'm trying to think of the ones we used to do a lot. Oh, difficult conversations. Yeah, it's just all kinds of stuff. But usually they're fun. We get people participating, even in large groups. There's a ton of ways that you can get people talking to their neighbor for a couple of moments and break things up a little bit. And so we promise the same 3 things every time we do a keynote. 1, it's going to be novel. You're not going to hear the same thing that you've heard before. 2, it's going to be practical. You're going to be able to take ideas and use them immediately. And 3, it's based in science. It's what our best practices coming from years and sometimes decades of research. Science plus practical plus novel. That's pretty much the recipe. And
that's what we go for.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun. So give us a call through Culsure, C-O-L-S-U-R-E, Culsure, C-U-L-S-U-R-E.com. Get Cindi out, do a keynote, lay on some wisdom and some fun.
Or Geoff.
Or me. Get there, we'll tell you a couple jokes, have a good old time. C-U-L-S-U-R-E.com. Call us. If we do a quick kind of recap of where we are. Our discussion today is about habits. The reason we want to talk about that is there's been, I think, a very important expansion to the research on the fairly classical trigger action reward habit loop, where you can work on any part of the trigger action reward and kind of try to unwind a habit loop that's bad or start one that's good. But now the 2.0 has to do with we can't think our way into a habit. We have to feel our way into a habit. Fortunately, a lot of our feelings about the rewards we're getting from a habit aren't up to date. And when we stop and actually pay attention to them, we realize I don't like this as much as I thought I did. And that then, working on that feeling and paying attention to that feeling can help give us some of the motivation we need to sustain a behavior change. And so with that as that's the reason for this episode, the kind of update to the classic way people think about habits. What do you think managers should take away from this new line of thinking about habits that can help the people that they're working with?
I think for one thing, it's getting yourself together. right?
Yeah,
and
point.
So it's because if you're a leader, you are setting the tone and the stage for what's appropriate behavior. So, I think the first thing is the manager needs to heal thyself. And the reason for that is you set the tone at work and your behavior sets the tone. And so if you have sort of these bad habits, then that people can see at work, like maybe you spend too much time in your office on email or on social media, then you are basically giving permission for others to do the same.
Yeah, we see this constantly. It's not so much that we see people, on TikTok during the office hours, which, a little bit of that, it's not going to kill anybody. But the bigger piece we see is people indulging inboxes, text messages, and instant messages, Teams messages, whatever, Slack messages, and that becomes their day-to-day.
And they can totally justify it because
it's actual work.
Like work.
I'm getting something done,
but it's not the most important work usually.
Yeah, it's disjointed. What comes at you through digital devices, what bombards us isn't unified bombardment. It's like sniping.
Right. You can't actually we have this conversation with a lot of people in coaching sessions, like they can't actually shut it off because if something that's an emergency comes in, they have to attend to it. But you have to have a plan for basically quickly sorting it out so you don't get pulled back into the email servicing realm.
Yeah, and this is not the conversation about managing digital distractions. That we can have later. We could probably devote a whole season to that. But as it relates to habits, our environment in a digital heavy service space, it's not even service space. We work in heavy manufacturing and people have their cell phones and people are getting hit up by text on cell phones all day long.
Right.
And
95% of those texts are things that could be handled later. It's just somebody's trying to get it off their plate so that way they don't have to worry about forgetting it later. But now you got somebody who is getting it put onto their plate. It could be handled at some other point in time. It's not an emergency, but they're dealing with that instead of a higher priority thing that needs to happen.
Yeah, in some ways, as Cal Newport has memorably argued, the modern workplace has basically arrayed itself to prevent people from doing good work. And it requires better habits or to say it differently, it requires if you're just a regular person, you have a job, a family, and you're just trying to, make ends meet and have some fun along the way. Go to Disneyland a couple times along the way, and you're listening to this podcast.
On your way to Disney.
On your way to Disneyland, hopefully. Yeah. It's possible that what the main takeaways for you are about stopping bad habits. How do we, at work, prevent the bad habits of chasing down every squirrel, which the digital age absolutely enables, and in some ways you could argue encourages.
And the workplace basically makes it very difficult for you to shut it off.
How do we get and accumulate better work habits? And so now let's answer that question based on everything we've talked about so far. You can do it the 1.0 way, where you isolate, okay, why did I just check my email? Why did I immediately respond to that text message? This is the time I said I was going to block off to work on the report that I need to give, to my monthly vaccine report, to borrow a great example from one of the places we work. Mm-hmm. This is when I was going to do my vaccine report. This is the 2-hour block of time I was going to do that.
But I keep getting all these emails.
I can't do that. And so you could go through, all right, what's my trigger? My trigger is I see this pop up, or I hear my phone vibrate. What's my action right now? I'm going and I'm looking at the phone and I'm pulling it. What's the reward I get? I feel like I get to knock something off my plate. I get to make that little one goes to a 0 on my app notification.
A super fallacy, because emails beget emails.
Right. But that would be the 1.0. The 2.0 way says, actually pay attention to when you do that. How does that make you feel? Well, I feel a little good. I knocked something out, but then I have the hangover of having to get back into my vaccine report. And now it's
possibly like a negative judgment on yourself for not getting some important stuff done.
Right. Yeah. And then I feel bad mentally for, why did I pull out of that? That email wasn't that important. How come I can't get any spare time? This job is terrible. You could get a trail of negative thoughts kind of rattling around in your head. And so that behavior actually wasn't that good for you. And so now you're paying attention to that. Well, wait a minute. I didn't feel that good when I did that. And so what if I, come heck or high water, actually, I can't block myself off for 2 hours from 10 to noon at this job to do the vaccine report tomorrow. But what if I block myself off from 10 to 10:30? And before I did that, I told my boss, hey, I'm going to take 30 minutes. And could I get a lot of this vaccine report done in just those 30 minutes? And then if that works, how does that feel? Well, it felt pretty good. I didn't get it all done, but I got it mostly done. And that was 30 minutes, and I didn't check any emails, and I didn't check any texts. And then could I add a little bit more to that? And could next week, instead of 35 minutes, can I get it to 45? And in 45 uninterrupted minutes, could I actually finish the entire report? So if you're a manager, you're wanting to, like Cindy said, fix yourself first. The easiest place to start for a manager is trying to claw back some protected time to do the most important parts of your job. Some of which will be kind of cognitive related, like I've got to do this project, I've got to do this report, and some of it's not. Some of it's managerial. I have to walk around. I need to walk around and like a lot of places we work with, a lot of healthcare environments. I was just at one yesterday, and the manager who runs the clinic is basically like, look, I just get so busy with my work that I haven't reestablished the bonds I used to have with the doctors. And he's running the clinic, and there's 11 doctors. And to walk around and say hello to just a handful of those take you 30 minutes to walk around. What's going on? How can I help? Just to talk to a couple. And that's this discussion. Well, why is he not doing that? Mm-hmm. In part because the habits of being immediately responsive to an email, to a text, when somebody just knocks on the door, and interruptions and so forth.
How is this actually applicable to managers? And so, the second way that this is applicable to managers is most people rise from like a technical job that they did really well, and they get put into management. And because they aren't exactly sure what they're doing, they have a tendency to revert back to the things that they knew how to do previously, which can become a habit.
Yeah, that's
so I've had a CNO who still did things on the floor on a daily basis that were technical, that were below her pay grade. But
we've had a lot of CNOs who do that.
Yeah, I know we have.
Chief nursing officer, by the way.
Yeah, and doing that because there's a part of them that feels this uncertainty about what they're currently having to face. And some of that's because it's newer, but some of that's because as you rise to a chief level in an organization, there's uncertainty. And so to get away from that, they go back like a level down, maybe two levels down, and they do
stuff
jobs
that they can actually do,
but that other people should actually be doing. And it makes them appear like micromanagers
Right.
which people hate.
Yeah, and then the parts of the job they need to be doing are not getting done.
Right.
Yeah, and eventually that, in one way or another, usually catches up.
Right.
Yeah, there was years ago. I haven't been able to find the reference on this. I thought it was from the Wall Street Journal, so forgive me if this is apocryphal, which just is a big word for. I don't think I made this up, but I've never been able to find it, so I'm worried. But here goes anyway. Here goes anyway. It was a study from, I think, the Wall Street Journal. They ask managers, do you know the most important thing you should be doing this week? And 100% of managers said yes. And then the second question was, did you actually get to work on it this past week? And 10% said yes.
I think somewhere in your notebooks that
I know. I'm
exists.
not going through all that.
I know. But I think
you remember
I do
what I'm
think
talking
that
about?
was I do think that was a real study.
Yeah. And that's indicative of this idea that we need to be detectives of how does that feel to put in another week of work and not move the needle on the things that were the most important? Or conversely, how does it feel this week that you actually moved the needle on the big things? And the answers to those questions can help guide you into better habits. Because we're not stupid. We're just designed to have behaviors that we know how to do become automatic. Mm-hmm. Other readings. There's a lot of people who love James Clear, Atomic Habits. Also B.J. Fogg, Tiny Habits. They have some similarities. They talk about starting small. Don't try to drop 30 pounds and be able to run a marathon. Try to go to the gym one more time this week than you did last week. Try to work out for 10 minutes longer today than you did yesterday, whatever.
Or try to rope off 10 more minutes for your critical work than you did today. Do that tomorrow.
Yeah. And so what's your thoughts on this idea of, I consider it kind of part of the 1.0 habit discussion of starting small and then building a little momentum. Any thoughts about that and how that applies for managers and encouraging the people we work with?
Well, I think it's not so much about breaking a bad habit as trying to, have better habits, right? Yeah. And so it's a little bit different than what we had been talking about. But I feel like that, I give that advice, similar advice a lot in coaching because, you have all the constraints and pressures from the organization and sometimes you just don't have the ability to structure your life the way that it would actually be optimal because of an organization. Yeah. And so the best that you can do is try to grab as much time as you can to do things like work when you're at the top of your game, probably from willpower or whatever. But, at least set aside as much time as you can for doing the busy stuff optimally in the best time of the day for you to actually perform hard work.
There's this idea of, if you go back to the 1.0 sources, the guy who rolled them all up years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, Charles Duhigg, talks about keystone habits, or sometimes you call them cascading habits. Mm-hmm. And so that's the idea that some habits create other good habits. And so the three that come to mind are exercise. People who exercise do eventually, if they stick with the exercise, tend to eat better and smoke and drink a little bit less.
And sleep better.
Yeah, and sleep better too. Yeah. So there tends to be a lot of other things that often happen if you can stick with the original.
Right. If you can follow through.
With the exercise habit.
Yeah.
The other is eating dinner a couple times a week with the people you're closest to, because that tends to, you eat a little better, you tend to talk a little more, problems tend to come out a little earlier when they're easier to solve.
I hadn't heard that one, but that makes sense. I've heard people talk about the importance of family dinner, but not in that way. Yeah,
it actually, again, you go back to the chain of it matters. It's the dinner that ultimately tends to lead to solving problems earlier and communicating more. But you can't have a communication intervention, get people to communicate more, and that doesn't guarantee that you're eating more dinners together.
Right.
So the way that you actually structure this does tend to matter. And the other one is getting a good night's sleep.
Oh, I love a good night's sleep.
Yeah, tends to. Then you feel more alert in the morning, better cognition, better interpersonal relations at work, at home. So it's a bunch of kind of positive things tend to come from that. Mm-hmm. So exercise, eating together a few times a week as a family or whatever your unit is. It doesn't have to be your family, but it's whatever that unit is, strengthens that unit, and then getting a good night's sleep. So not all habits are created equal.
I literally, on the sleep front, in one of my coaching sessions, told a doctor he needed to get more sleep.
Yeah, we do that all the time.
We figured, but he was with me because he was like on the naughty list, and they were desperate to have his behavior change, and he was firing people up all the time.
I remember this guy.
He's actually a really nice man, and so like they gave him to me as sort of the last ditch effort. I talked to him for like a half an hour, and I'm like, dude, you need sleep. And he's like, how am I going to edit? Because he was always on call. And I'm like, look, I realize you can't pull all your effort out from underneath them all at once, but we're going to start taking it back slowly. So in that regard, it was taking it back slowly. And all I did was start getting more sleep once a week.
Yep.
And next thing I know, the CEO is bragging about how awesome he is. And he's like chairing like departments.
Yep.
And
this is a true story. They put him on the board.
Yeah.
They didn't put anything out on the board of the organization.
Yeah. And the only difference.
Yep.
I looked like a genius. The only difference was I was like, dude, you need sleep.
Yeah. Yep. It's a true story.
And I mean, and we've talked about it.
Yep.
You know, we've talked about how, some of these things are sanctioned by work.
Right. Yeah. This quick response. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how that can be at the detriment of the harder, more thoughtful brain work that you need to do. All right. So let's put it all together now.
Well, before we put it all together, there's one other thing that we have to cover because it's just out there and it's a myth.
All right.
There's a myth that 3 weeks and you can develop a habit.
Yeah. All right.
It came from one research study.
Yeah.
And it has not been validated with other research. And it appears that it goes, people develop habits anywhere from 21 days to like 256 days.
Yeah, it can take almost a year.
It's like calculus. Like it's partly personality. It's partly
calculus is personality.
No, like I'm saying, how long it's going to take you to build a habit is like calculus. Like it's complicated. You know what's involved. Like there's personality traits. Right. There are like the strength of the reward value. So like. And how frequently you can engage in it. So there's all sorts of things that go into how fast you're actually going to pick up a habit.
Yeah.
And so we need to dump this idea that you can punish yourself for 3 weeks and walk away with the habit that you want, because that is very likely to not actually be true. It's one of those things that sometimes happens where
it just catches on.
It basically goes viral.
Yeah.
And it's a belief that's actually inaccurate.
Yeah.
And the reason why it's important to know that isn't to try to discourage you, but don't feel like a failure in 3 weeks if you don't have the habit that you want.
Yeah. 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 It takes time, but we have the time. And why we wanted to talk about habits is that if you encourage yourself to be more of a detective for how the behaviors that you're doing, how do they make you feel? You may actually get a positive surprise. And you may learn that a lot of the things you want to stop doing actually don't feel as good as they used to, making it easier to stop. And some of the things that you'd like to do more often actually give you a positive reward. They actually feel good. And that is a very powerful mechanism to try to create more of the behaviors we want and to walk back from some of the things that we realize in our lives aren't as counterproductive or aren't as productive as we'd like them to be.
Well, so that wraps up habits.
That's right.
So I hope that y'all start feeling what you're feeling inside.
Go out and pay attention to how you're feeling about what you're doing and see if that doesn't lead you in the direction of stopping things that aren't working as well as you thought and increasing the things that might bring you more satisfaction, enjoyment, and fulfillment.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us today on the Muse.
Catch you next time.
And
we better have some good habits next time we talk. Don't want to see you messing with that email.
We want you to get in the habit of listening or watching the Management Muse. So
pay attention to how you feel. Don't you feel good now at the end of this?
That's right. Don't you feel smarter? And so now, aren't you fired up to go apply some of these?
That's right. Put it to work.
So now, make sure that you get the alerts when our show comes in, and we appreciate reviews and stars and
all of it.
You sharing and telling friends, and we just appreciate all of you who are listening.
Yep.
And so,
that's it.
Next time. Till
next time, y'all be good out there.
Thanks again for joining us on the Management Muse. We appreciate likes, stars, downloads, shares, and subscriptions. For more information on the resources that help us generate this content, check out the reference material in our show notes. Special thanks to Rebecca Henley, Abby Ariano, and Ariel Villafane. Thank you. See you next time.